What's up, everybody? It's me. It's your boy. It's me. It's PLD.
And I'm Untitled Jarvi. Welcome to Class Action, Paul. It's been a week.
It has been a week.
Took a week off.
I feel rusty as hell. I feel like I'm out of my groove. I'm not quite ready, but I didn't steal your line this time, so
You didn't. You're a pro.
I'll be happy about that. Let's just say that. That's right. It's been a week. So last week we took a week off because of my scheduling. My work was killing me. So last time we were on was actually our live show with Brandon Hanna when we talked.
Don't remind me of that episode.
Yeah, you know, like that.
I love that episode because Brandon was on and the topic we discussed. I did not enjoy being a deer in fucking headlights, getting like the worst stutter and sort of blank mind. I don't know what happened. Don't look that up, people. Don't look that up, though. Please tell me you don't have it. Well, that's embarrassing. It's like actually embarrassing, not like funny embarrassing, but like really hard to look at embarrassing.
Actually, I feel bad. I feel like I failed you in a way because there's a couple of times where you did have that moment where you did definitely lose your plot there a little bit. I was like, should I come in and save him? But I kept thinking you were getting there. And I was like, it didn't quite. So kind of got like, well, let's move on from that. But you know what? Let's move on from that and let's talk about this week's show.
Please, let's.
This week's show is we are going to be talking about. Well, let's talk about Class Action in general first. I guess I should do that first. Class Action is a show where we put up two opposing views, option A, option B. We put them up against each other. We have 5 custom-made categories that we come up with to really determine which one is the ultimate victor. It's great to do. I love doing this A versus B, but it's always very surprising what ends up happening. Don't you think?
It is, and it's a lot to do with the categories that we come up with, because every time we do custom categories and they are not easy to come up with, let's say that, and sometimes this week, for example, I'll just say right now what my snap judgment is. I would say Indiana Jones will win it by a landslide, but I do like Back to the Future way more. So it's weird. It's so weird because
jumping ahead of a time, or snap judgment is not supposed to be for like half an hour or so.
I know, but I feel like the discussion is there, and because the categories they can mess you up, man.
I can. All right, well, that's interesting. You say. Since you just called an audible there, I'll throw my 2 cents in. I do think Indiana Jones wins, but I think it's a lot closer than you think it is. And I love both franchises, and I had a hard time looking over these categories, looking over the films in general. They're two very different kind of franchises. I remember when I announced this when I was on one of the Action Guys shows this weekend. They let me plug it. Even Drew was like, "That's interesting." It's not quite. Usually, our things they have something in common that you can really put into great. Star Wars versus Star Trek. They're both like sci-fi epics or whatever. Or we do horror movies against each other, or do actors against each other. This is just two legendary 80s franchises that really that's all they have in common. It's not like they're of the same vein, of the same thing. I mean, they're both genre films in a way. They're both big franchises, but as far as like the actual comparisons, it makes it interesting to see it for me, what we're gonna come up with. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
I feel like they differ a lot through substance, in substance, but as overall atmosphere and vibe, they are very similar.
Well, I'll give you that. But as far as like when you look at surface, like what our usual shows are versus something like this, I think it's a little bit of a different. It's not something that you do immediately, because when you come up with something, usually we have them that's an immediate thing, like Star Wars, Star Trek. This is an immediate like Indiana Jones, Back to the Future. It almost should be in a way Indiana Jones and like the Mummy franchise or something possibly. That's kind of a spirit, really spiritually together. I almost thought about doing that at some point. Maybe
me too. I think it was Sen Live, right? They talked about like the Mummy being like a ripoff of Indiana Jones.
It is, and I've talked about it for a long time. So I've actually considered maybe that'll be a show down the road. We'll see what happens with that. Although I think Indiana Jones will probably win that pretty easily. But that's just me again.
But it will be a great. Like sometimes it doesn't even matter who wins or loses. It's all about the.
It's a good discussion.
It's about the discussion, the categories, and how we get into them. So,
real quick, I do want to do a little sidebar. I'm going to throw an audible here on you.
For sure.
So you got to see Tenet. You got to see yourself in Tenet. I still have not yet. And just give me your quick thoughts, real quick. Go ahead. Give me your thoughts.
All right, so we're doing a Tenet review.
We got to do it.
I've seen it twice now. All right, no, I'm all in. I've seen it twice now.
The first time I saw the movie, I'll be totally honest, I was a little disappointed.
Okay. I loved everything that happened. Like visually, the movie is and was stunning the first time, but it's so difficult to like connect the dots. And I don't want to get into it, but the final set piece that happens is so outrageously complex that you're like, wait, what? I don't like. I wish I could. No, I everything would be a spoiler if I said it. So yeah, so I came out of it. I was like, okay, I had people explain to me what the movie was about. I did dig Robert Pattinson way more than I did John David Washington.
Oh, really?
But later I realized, when I watched it the second time, I realized, because John David Washington plays a very sort of like a cold-blooded, more analytical protagonist than for example, Cobb in Inception.
Right. Okay.
The protagonist, because he doesn't have a name. His name is the protagonist in the movie. John David Washington's. He's very calculated. He does what needs to be done. He's sort of, and that the first time I saw him was like, wow, okay, he's not doing much acting wise. But the person I was watching it with was like, yeah, but that was the character. He was like super stern. He was cold blooded. That's what he was like, badass like that. And when I came around on that, I sort of started to appreciate the movie in a new way. And but Robert Pattinson is, for me, he's the star of the movie.
Okay.
He was so freaking great. It kind of reminded me of Leo and Brad Pitt and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There was some of
that
those
kind of vibe
in there.
huh? All right.
Yeah.
I look forward to that,
but Kenneth Branagh, unfortunately, was the worst part.
Really?
He should not be playing Russian villains. Like, that's the second time he does it.
Back when he did
it was
Jack Ryan.
Jack Ryan, that's right.
Shadow Recruit.
And yeah, he's so over the top. He's really just like yelling behind his table, drinking vodka, sort of like this very stereotypical Russian oligarch villain.
It's kind of funny you say that, because actually I've heard from a couple of people who have seen that he was their favorite part.
I've heard that also, and I cannot understand that. It might be because we are so close, like Estonia is so close to Russia, the sort of Russian accent and everything comes into play here.
Oh, maybe.
Sort of that mentality.
Maybe interesting.
But a villain needs some part that's, that you can sympathize with or empathize with. There was nothing on that character side. There was absolutely nothing. It was just your insert villain. He's just evil. He needs to do evil things. There was nothing redeemable about him.
That's interesting you say that too, though, because a lot of people have said, like some of the reviews I've read or some people I've talked to have said something to the effect of, you don't know whether he's a good guy or a bad guy overall. It's just like he is what he is. I mean, don't go into spoilers if you want to go. I'm not going to ask for spoilers on that, but like, that it was more.
I get that, and the genius of Tenet is that there's so many stuff that you don't uncover during like actually watching the movie, but later you analyze things and you start to connect the things. There's a really cool theory about Robert Pattinson's character. I won't say anything about it, but I feel like it's true. It's been talked about extensively. But with Sator, the Kenneth Branagh villain, I think there's some stuff that you could make up from these theories,
right?
But I didn't really pay a lot of attention to them. Okay. But overall, now the second time, I freaking love the movie. I gave it like an 8 out of 10 the first time, which is still good, but it wasn't I expected a 10 out of 10 movie.
Right.
Second time, I would give it a 9 out of 10.
Okay, that's better. All right. Well, that's probably too much. I thank you for indulging us. A little sidebar on Indiana Jones versus Back to the Future, and we're talking about Tenet, but we're starved.
And the music in Tenet was insanely good.
We're starved for new films, so give us just a little bit of break. But let's move on now. We are talking about, like I said, we're talking about Indiana Jones, Adventure Has a Name, versus Back to the Future, the franchise.
Oh, you mean Scott Pilgrim?
That does look like Scott Pilgrim, doesn't it?
Yeah,
a lot like Scott Pilgrim. I love their alternate posters. As you know, we love our alternate posters here. These are two great 80s legendary franchises. I love both of them very much. I grew up on them. I'm an 80s kid. So these two are probably beyond Star Wars. Star Wars was my biggest one, but discounting Star Wars, these are probably my favorite two trilogies of that time. I know Indiana Jones has the 4th movie now in 2008 or whatever, but I looked at it as the trilogies. They were my childhood. I dressed as Indiana Jones one year for Halloween. I dressed as Marty McFly one year for Halloween.
Nice.
I had them on VHS. I wore them out. I had all the copies. I remember my mom taking me to see Temple of Doom in the theaters. And I remember my mom taking me to see the original Back to the Future in theaters. So it's just, these are undeniably inputted on my brain.
And when you went to see Casablanca in the theaters?
I'm not quite that old. Okay, that's enough out of you. That's enough out of you. No old man jokes.
I should ask Roka that.
He might know. I'm this much younger enough. I'm just enough younger than him. That
Actually, I'm an '80s kid as well. I was born '89 at the end of the year, so I can call myself an '80s kid.
No, you can't. No, you really can't. But
born in '89, dude. I'm an '80s kid.
You wish. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, like I said, what we're going to do is we always do player games before we get to our categories that we have our 5 custom made categories. We have a couple games we like to play. The first one we always like to play is my favorite game. What would Ed Harris play? Everybody knows. Sir. Everybody knows that Ed Harris is my favorite actor. If you don't know that by now, and you definitely haven't watched me in anything, but I think he's my favorite actor of all time. I like that he never mails it in. He always adds something to the role. I think Dan Merle actually said it on a show he was on, that he said that he's always that kind of, he gives film legitimacy. If you just put him in the role, you automatically legitimize your film. It's that kind of actor, and I love it. So what we do is we try to plug him into the franchise somewhere. We can either recast him in a role, or we can get more creative and write a new role and change the storyline a little bit. And that might be sacrilegious to some, but you know what? It's just in our heads for a couple minutes. So what the hell?
Dude, I recast Ed Harris's Shatner last week. So and the funny part, I didn't even realize that I was doing it. I'm like, yeah, sure, because Leonard Nimoy, so you gotta have Kirk in there. And then Brandon goes, what about Shatner? I'm like,
well, let's see if you can embarrass yourself again then. How about it? Why don't we go you first for, let's try Indiana Jones. You and Indiana Jones.
All right, my Indiana Jones. I'll be honest, I probably will embarrass myself again because my picks are kind of, I feel like I didn't have a lot of inspiration this time, because usually I can think of these elaborate characters for him.
Right.
But this time, so I put him in Raiders. And I was circling the idea of, Belloc or something, but I wouldn't want to recast Belloc. I feel like he's doing an awesome job. And now I would put Ed Harris as Belloc's right-hand man, sort of his lieutenant. Because Belloc has this sort of, he's a villain, but he's like swarmy, this, kind of like jokey at times. He's not this, hard-hitting villain. So I feel like Ed Harris would be the yin to his yang, sort of. This very authoritative. I always say authoritative about Ed Harris.
He's very authoritative.
Yeah, but I feel like So this time I would definitely cast him, in his stereotypical role that he usually plays. These hard asses.
Right. Okay. I like
balance
that.
Belloc, sort of.
I get that. I did something similar for Indiana Jones. I did something very similar, but although I did just replace the villain in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, I made Ed Harris Walter Donovan. I just thought that Walter Donovan's a little smarmy in the beginning, but I kind of have that. It almost seems like another. Actually, it's funny. Funny you say it. It's another kind of ripoff or homage to Indiana Jones' The National Treasure series. Those two movies, they're kind of similar in that way. And Ed Harris is in the second National Treasure. It's kind of a similar role. He kind of comes on in the beginning.
Yeah.
He's kind of like, he's not friends. They're obviously rivals about things, but he's professional about it. But then you find out later on he's actually really a bad guy. Mm-hmm. Although he does have a better redemption part in National Treasure too than Walter Donovan ever have.
He's freaking awesome in National Treasure. I really enjoyed that movie.
Me too. So, but I'd put him as Walter Donovan. I think it'd be cool to kind of like see him go through what he did and help Indy along the way. And then you have to reveal that he's the bad guy at the end. So always a good bad guy. So that's what I'm going to go with him for Indiana Jones. It's a little bit of a cop out. I'll admit it's a little bit. You always put Ed Harris. I always like to put Ed Harris in those villain roles because that's what he fits well. I'm going to make up with it, I think, for Back to the Future. But I'll let you go first in your Back to the Future.
Okay, my Back to the Future. Now this is the. This is the choice that I'm not too proud of. I put him as Strickland in Back to the Future. So again, I just put him exactly what he feels like he would do. But I wouldn't want to. I can't remember the name of the actor who plays Strickland. He's one of those actors that That's Strickland. That's
Yeah.
You always know his face. You never know his name. I've done my
remember.
homework very well, as you can see. So I just want to see Ed Harris yell again.
Slacker.
And
I can
have
totally
this,
see it.
this flop
Slacker.
sweat that is sort of like
James Tolkien. That's who it is. James Tolkien. That's who does the
Tolkien.
Tolkien. Tolkan. Not Tolkien.
I was Tolkien. Whoa.
No, I can totally see. That's actually another thing. I told you with the shotgun coming off in Back to the Future Part 2. Where he comes Slacker's not perfect. I do like that a lot, actually. What I'm going to do, Back to the Future, this is what I'm kind of a little proud of. I'm going to have him in all 3 movies.
Nice.
He's going to be in a recurring role and some mysterious role.
Okay, so that's a new role we're creating.
This is a new role. I'm creating a new role for Ed Harris, Back to the Future. I'm going to see if he can pull it off. But he's going to seem authoritative at first. He's going to be following Marty and Doc Brown. Maybe the first movie you don't really see him very much. You're going to see in the background of a couple scenes. Maybe he follows up on one of the scenes. He'll kind of come into view a couple times. You see him a little more in Part 2. And he gets maybe a confrontation with him. So maybe during Part 2, he gets a confrontation, and you find out that he's actually a time traveler also. You don't know why. Part 3, you find out he is with like a time kind of maybe a time agency kind of thing. Maybe not like a necessarily authoritative, but he's like kind of like he's following them around to make sure they don't mess up too bad. Like
he's a time cop.
He's kind of like a time cop. But then the reveal comes at the very end is that not only is he a time cop, making sure that they don't screw up too badly, making sure that they don't undo all of existence. He's actually the great-great-great-grandchild of Doc Brown, who's the head of the agency. That's the big reveal at the end of Part 3.
You win. It's game over. Game over, man.
Game over, man. Game over.
I also thought that you were going that he's actually because time travel, it's a very paradoxical thing, that maybe he was the one who built or gave the idea to Doc to build a time machine, but then who got basically it's the egg and the
chicken and the egg. Yeah, definitely. I like that idea. I think that's the best part too, is because you see, I wanted to be all like a really Ed Harris like the whole time, authoritative, almost mean looking, almost thing. But at the end, when he reveals himself, also he like just becomes this like kind of fun loving guy. Like you got to realize that no, he wasn't. You only saw him as being authoritative. When he gets to be you get to be friendly with him. He's like just like Doc Brown in a way, kind of like kooky, a little maybe a little kooky, like very excited and very, I don't know. I love to be kind of fun. So
I love it.
All right. All right. Well, that's how we cast Ed Harris. If you guys, everybody in the chat wants to cast him in some way or create a new story, let us know. We'll be watching and seeing what you guys come up with. But without further ado, let's go on because I'm actually very excited about our next segment.
Me too.
We have a segment that we call the Public Defender.
Oh, yes.
And we usually bring somebody on or have a recording from somebody because we recorded at God Awful Hour, 7 a.m. on the East Coast.
It's 2 p.m. here.
We do this for Richard R. Jarvi, guys. But does limit our guests sometimes as far as that goes. But we have a guest that did pre-record a video, and I'm very excited because if we're going to talk about Back to the Future, who else are we going to get in our space?
Who wrote the actual book on it.
One person who actually wrote the book. Before we get there, tell us what Public Defender is supposed to be, Richard R. Jarvi.
Sure thing. So the name Public Defender itself, it came from the idea that we wanted our show Class Action to be a pun, and sort of it would have more puns in it, that it would be sort of part of the legal world. That's why we end the show, courts adjourned and stuff like that. So we figured, but actually there was no legal connections at all.
We've kind of got away from it, actually. We kind of got a lot away from it, except for in like the titles and stuff. We still do the jury, that kind of thing. But
we'll make it work. So Public Defender is pretty much an off-the-cuff list. Now, we try to get guests each week, or a guest who could come up with a top 5 list, or maybe just a question for us to answer on the spot without pre-preparing anything. So public defenders in movies, they usually are overpaid, or not overpaid, underpaid, overworked. They don't have a lot of time to prepare. When they show up in court, they might have to come up with stuff on the spot. So this is pretty much what we want to do to ourselves, put ourselves on the spot so we can come up with some embarrassing answers. No slight against public defenders. I might need one day. This is just, for joke.
They
Or
actually do a great job. We look like idiots, but that's par for the course at this point. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on a recording from a very cool individual. He works at the Movie Trivia Schmodown. Of course, you know that. Also, has an interviews does an interview show or a radio show with Booker T from formerly of the WWE. He's actually a WWE alum. This is a great guy. I love to see him more on the action industry shows, things of that nature. Without further ado, Mr. Brad the Boat.
Yes, sir.
Gilmore. And let's get this going on.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Brad Gilmore, but you might know me by another name. You might know me as The Boat. Hashtag best of all time. Hashtag Brad's Opinions True. Hashtag boat life. Hashtag I'm on a boat. And I'm here. I'm here for one reason. You're talking Indiana Jones. You're talking Back to the Future. Trying to figure out which one is better. Well, here's my question to you all. As the author of Back from the Future, a celebration of the greatest time travel story ever told, here's my question to you. Between Indiana Jones and Back to the Future, we saw many different time periods of the past. You saw the 1880s, you saw the 1950s, you saw the 1920s, so on and so forth. My question, which film depicted its period the best? Was it Indiana Jones or was it Back to the Future? Who had the better version of the past, the better looking, the better feeling? Which one felt more real? That's what The Boat has for y'all. I'm interested to see what it's like. Just like I'm interested for you all to buy my book, Back from the Future, Celebration of the Greatest Time Travel Story Ever Told. Yeah.
That was awesome.
That is great. Thank you very much, Brad. The link
Brad.
to buy his book is going to be in the description. So go buy the book. I actually have bought the book. I read it. It is a wonderful read, very informative. And also, just so I know, I say Booker T formerly of WWE. I meant he's an alum of the WWE. They still work and everything else. But yeah, Brad is great. I also want to say, Brad, I also want to support him. And they just announced he's going to have a show on SEN Live with Jen Sturger on Thursdays. It's called Coming Up Soon. I believe it's coming up soon. It's going to be a great Schmodown centric show, and they've been doing great work together, doing previews for the pay-per-views every Monday before the pay-per-view. They'd have this big preview special. They were great together, and of course, you can also find Brad Gilmore on the Rundown with Frank Janish on Saturdays as well. Wonderful host. So we're lucky to have that. Thank you again, Brad. I'm just talking so I can stall because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this question. But
sidebar.
Go ahead.
I have a proposition for you now.
Okay.
His question sounded a lot like a category. So what do you say we turn this into an off-the-cuff category, a sixth one, or maybe we swap out the fifth one?
Okay.
Or do you want to just add one more?
I'm just going to add the one more because I think that this could be like we can actually use this later on if we end up being tied. We'll use this
exactly, and we'll do it anyway, even if we need it or don't.
All right. It wasn't a category. It's good though. I will. You want to start? Or you want me to start?
Do you want to start on that category?
On this category we have right now.
All right.
The Brad Gilmore question. Brad Gilmore question.
I think you go first. I feel like you're more confident in this.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say that this is a great question from Brad. I love this question because they do have the great iconic scenes from the past. I mean, even Indiana Jones, even the last, the Crystal Skull has the role which is different from all the rest of them. For the Indiana Jones franchise, Back to the Future jumps around at different times.
Yeah.
But I have to say my initial instinct says it's got to be Back to the Future. And here's why. They're so good at what they do for each different time zone. And I feel like the 50s that they did is so perfectly legitimate into 1955 that I really feel like I'm there. Like my mom has told me stories about growing up in the 50s. And I really feel like when he walks around, and she said it too, when he walks around that first time, he sees like, you hear the Mr. Sandman song and you're seeing all the different, like the gas station with the guys filling up the gas. You go into Lou's Cafe and you're seeing these like, everything seems so legitimately real. Whereas Indiana Jones is great, but it doesn't seem like I don't know. Not that they cared to paint the detail, but it wasn't as important to paint the detail. Indiana Jones almost seems like it could be, if you take away the fact that the Nazis, or take away the fact that the times you hear about, the look itself is just kind of a early 19th century look, nothing more specific about it. I think Back to the Future is a little more specific with its time frames, with its visualization of the time zones, just like the West, and also into the future, which is obviously you can't depict that as something we knew about it at that time. But it seems more carefully coordinated and more cared about than Indiana Jones in a way, as far as depicting its time, if that makes sense to you.
That's so weird, because I'm like completely on the other side of the spectrum. Wow. Not in a bad way at all. Right. I feel like, were you done though? I don't want to.
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, you
okay, because I feel like Back to the Future with all its time periods, it feels very much like it doesn't feel real at all to me, and that's not a bad thing. It feels very campy, sort of. It feels like a stage that is set. I feel like I'm on a movie set, not watching the actual era. As in Indiana Jones, they travel all over the world. There's different set pieces. They're in the nature a lot as well. With Back to the Future, it feels like, but I love that about Back to the Future. It has these like sort of, because if we're going through the different times, so the 50s, the 80s, that's where Marty's time, right? And the 2015, which I think what that movie shows is nothing really changes that much, because the diner is always there. Right. The skateboard turns into the hoverboard.
Right. The running jokes.
Even the Western sort of, it feels like there's Biff, there's the bully again. There's a saloon. I think the underlying tone is that it shows that nothing really changes, but the outside and the cosmetics are everything.
Interesting. I got what you're saying there. Okay. Well, then again, Indiana Jones is supposed to be more realistic, though, isn't it? It's supposed to be more of a. I mean, they're both campy adventure films, but like Indiana Jones is definitely the more realistic of the two. Back to the Future is definitely more of the fun, zany type of film. So that's where I guess maybe I forgive the zany parts of it, the running jokes and everything else, to where like, and maybe it's a more exaggerated, maybe that's what it is to me. Maybe it's a more exaggerated realism that gets me. The fact that things don't always change in your neighborhood. I mean, some things do, but you still have those kind of buildings that stay the same. They just alter a little bit over time. Maybe they change the title of the thing, or they change like it's still a gas station. It's still a movie theater, that kind of thing. That still happens in these towns to the day. But it felt something more crisp about it to me. And then I think more. So I get what you're saying. I'm still going to say Back to the Future. But yeah, so we're both going 1-to-1. So they're not going to help us.
Yeah, I feel like as depiction of the era, I would have to give it to Indiana Jones because of what you said as well, because of the realism. Although it's weird to say realism about Indiana Jones, but if you put it up against Back to the Future, I would say it's the more sort of takes itself more seriously in a way. Although the final movies on both sides are very, I would say they're totally ridiculous movies, but in a good way, in an awesome way.
Absolutely, I don't mind them at all.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so we go 1-to-1. It's not going to really help us. We are being tied, but that Brad again, it's a great question.
It was.
I appreciate that.
He outdid us because we were struggling with categories this week. Sort of, we were going, and he just slaps one on us that is like feels like a slam dunk category. Yeah,
I don't know why we do anything about ourselves. I'm glad we didn't though, because it makes a good category for him. Good question for him. Yep. So I love it. Thank you again, Brad. Vote.
Thank you, Brad.
And buy his book.
I should though.
Definitely should. And watch his shows. He's got some great shows. So all right,
he was an AI as well.
Yes.
Awesome episode. Go watch it.
Yes, he was definitely. Yep. Hopefully we'll have him again on actually. He fits the AI brand a lot, so it's good to see.
Very much so. Yeah.
So it's very good comparison. But all right, without further ado, though, you know what? Let's go into it. We already did our snap judgment. This is usually where we do snap judgment. We already put that into place. Both say Indiana Jones, although I think it's going to be closer than you do. But let's go with our 5 custom-made categories that we have come up with. Our 5 categories are going to tell us which one is the greater saga, the greater franchise. Of course, it's really interesting. By the way, we have 4 movies for Indiana Jones, 3 for Back to the Future. I actually consider I'm gonna throw this out there a little behind the scenes. I did suggest at one point to Richard that we toss Indy 4 out and just make it the Back to the Future trilogy versus the Indiana Jones trilogy. He didn't want to do that. He said no, we had to do the whole franchise, and I said okay. It's not that I don't like Crystal Skull. I just thought it would be. I just was keeping it to the 80s trilogies. That made more sense to me. But I'm okay with it. I've accepted it. I'm moving on. So without further ado, 5 categories that we have. Number 1, the better protagonist, the better hero. Indiana Jones versus Marty McFly. Harrison Ford versus Alex P. He does about to say Michael J. Fox. two of the most iconic 80s actors we've had.
Yeah.
In all time. So that's a really big slam dunk first one to go into. Second one we got better, worst movie.
Yeah, it was weird to say it, right?
We're gonna say better, worst. I mean, obviously we have trilogies, we have sagas. They can't all be the best, so they be the least. So, but sometimes a saga is built on what least movie is the better film, so it makes it a better franchise overall. I don't know if we picked the same ones or not. I'm interested to see, because we both kind of went away and just almost like, is it assumed that it is? I don't know. We'll have to see. But we'll go from there. Number 3, better score / soundtrack. I kind of threw this on Jarvi. I had this on Jarvi last minute. It was originally just better score, but I had to figure out, I had to talk a little bit about some of the music that's not Alan Silvestri's score, because it makes part of the iconicness of Back to the Future is some of the music they do have in there, and scenes in there for including music. So I want to include those as well. Finally, 4, better potential sequels. Where does this franchise go? Obviously, Indiana Jones has Indiana Jones 5 actually being made. Back to the Future is nothing in that realm at this point. They've kind of hinted at maybe rebooting it once or twice, but it never quite gets off the ground, and probably for the best, but we'll talk about that. But I love this category. I always love this category. This is my favorite category. So I love speculating about futures of franchises that I love. And finally, number 5, we went with more iconic items. Both franchises have these items that you kind of like, you throw them against the wall. Like if it's on the Smithsonian, you see these couple items on here, and we'll talk about them. You're like, oh, yep, Indiana Jones. Yep, Back to the Future. And which one is more iconic, though? We're going to find out right now. Well, later on, because that's number 5. We're going to go back to number 1, first of all. So let's just get right into it. The better protagonist, Indiana Jones, Marty McFly, Harrison Ford, Michael J. Fox.
This breaks my heart.
I'm gonna let you start.
But I have to pick one.
It does. I love both of them so much.
So tough, like, because you said it before when we talked about Indiana Jones a bit. I'm not a big indie guy. I've seen the movies and I appreciate the movies, but I'm not like Han Solo. Like Indy is not on the same level at all for me as Han Solo is. Which is weird because Indiana Jones actually won our face-off with Han Solo versus Indiana Jones. But I just can't shake how freaking phenomenal Harrison Ford is as Indiana Jones. Now, I think I'm still undecided, but because Marty McFly, like Michael J. Fox is Marty McFly for sure. Harrison Ford, you could say his top 3 are Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and maybe even Jack Ryan, right?
Could be, maybe even the
Marty McFly is Michael J. Fox, and Michael J. Fox is Marty McFly.
I would argue, well, I don't know.
But if I had to, like, how I'm trying to decide, if I had to think of a recast, like, who would I have easier time to recast? Just someone. It doesn't have to be a specific person. I think it would be easier to recast Marty McFly. I feel so bad. Because Harrison Ford is there's no one else. I can't recast him.
Right.
It's undoable. I have to give this to Harrison Ford with a shattered heart.
Shattered hearts, broken a million places, hot takes all over. Hot takes Jarvi. Coming out to play again, but in this case, it's actually I don't know if it is much of a hot take. I will say that I could argue that Michael J. Fox has Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties, a TV series, which is just an iconic role for him. I can see him also as Teen Wolf. He also had the role in Spin City. A lot of TV shows he did. Although I would agree that Marty McFly is probably his number 1. And probably definitely is number 1, to be honest with you. But the recasting thing you brought up is very interesting to me. It's very intriguing because would you recast Marty McFly or could you continue the adventures without him? That's kind of a sequel question. But I do agree that if I had to recast somebody, I probably would choose again with broken heart to recast Marty McFly because I feel like the way I look at it, Indiana Jones versus Back to the Future. Indiana Jones is the title of the franchise. It is the focus of the thing. There's nothing without Indiana Jones. Back to the Future still has Doc Brown.
Yeah, that's true.
And that kind of thing. And so it's still not quite just Marty McFly's movie. Marty's a fun-loving guy. He's a cool kid, you root for him. You relate to him a little bit, enough anyway. If you're not, you weren't the cool kid in the '80s, just so kind of like he's like the cool kid that might let you hang out with him in a way. But the funny thing is, when you look at him now, he's like, is he really that cool of a kid? You don't know for sure, but he comes off pretty cool.
He comes off, yeah, he does.
But you like him a lot. But damn, you want to be Indiana Jones,
right?
You want to grow up to be Indiana Jones.
He's a professor, an archaeologist, an adventurer. He's like James Bond. He's everything.
Part-time professor.
Part-time. That's.
But yeah, he's got the coolness. He's got the. I mean, he was pretty much one of the most. Just guys want to be him. Girls want to be
the sexiest man alive.
Yeah, I mean, he was everything. So I think.
Yeah.
And it comes down to it, as much as I love Marty McFly, I have to give this to Indiana Jones as well. But it's with a heavy heart because
it is.
Marty McFly is a great.
Because I grew up with Back to the Future movies. Like Marty was my guy growing up. I didn't watch Indiana Jones movies. I did not. But I still gotta give it to Harrison.
He's so fun. Marty McFly is so much fun. He has the skateboarding, guitar playing. I love the guy, but at the same time, it's hard to vote against her. I think Indiana Jones is one of the most iconic characters like of all time, like beyond everything. I'm trying to say Indiana Jones, the character is iconic, whereas Back to the Future is iconic. Marty McFly is a little bit underneath.
Makes sense. Yeah, so for sure.
All right. Well, that's the first category down. Let's get into our second category, the better, worst movie of the saga. I'm curious if we pick the same one because sometimes you blow me away with your hot takes so often I don't know where to go. What is your worst Indiana Jones movie?
It's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Okay, that's the accepted one. That's the accepted one.
Like, please don't.
If it was anything else, I would have been very disappointed. And this is coming from someone who actually does defend Crystal Skull. I'm a defender of it. I think it's a fine movie. It's not nearly as bad as it gets hyped out to be. There's a couple of segments in there that are agree. There's a couple of segments in there that I get why people hate.
The fridge moment.
The swing vines, like Shia LaBeouf, like swinging through the jungle, and like, it's so awful. Some of the events are so awful, but they're all like little moments. The rest of the surrounding film is actually a lot of fun, a great pulpy adventure, and it fits the character. But that's an argument for a different day. We can go into this for a million reasons. I know people in the chat are always yelling at me right now, saying, "God damn, this is an awful movie." But either way, we're actually technically agreeing with you guys in the chat at this point because it is the worst Indiana Jones film. I'm not going to say otherwise, so I'm okay with that. So that's my choice as well. What about Back to the Future for you? What's your worst one?
The third one.
I agree with you there too, which is funny because commercially would agree with us. Most response actually puts Back to the Future second too as the worst film. Now, to me, I always thought 3 was the reason why 3 to me was a step down was because it felt a little tired by that point. Like it was the same recycled. Like when you recycled the gags in part 2, it was funny, iconic, and almost quirky. Like because you were seeing the film again from a different perspective. Like when he travels back to 1955 again, you get to see different sides of it. And the fact that the gags were repeating was kind of like, it's kind of funny. I like the repeating gag. But by the time the third one came up, it was kind of like a little bit like there's a question like, well, why does Marty McFly's ancestor marrying someone who's just like his mother? Like it's just like it doesn't start making sense anymore.
No.
Like some of the running gags kind of like, okay, yeah, we see this like 3 times now. And I get, okay, so now we're gonna see the 1880s version of this gag, and like it's like, okay, we've seen it twice now, and the third time it's like, it's a little less funny. So as much as I still love Back to the Future 3, don't get me wrong, I still have a lot of fun with that. I still think it's a great story. It's a fitting ending to the trilogy. It's definitely for me the worst of the movies. I love the future. I love seeing the future. So that definitely, all the different cool things in the future help sell me on being part 2 being. But there's actually a time when I was younger, talking about hot takes, I actually liked 2 better at one point.
Yes, I was trying to get to that. Me too. Honestly, me too. Second was my favorite for a while. I think it was when I was 20. I was like, okay, the first one, wow, whoa. How did I like the second one better?
I think what it was I saw one more than any other ones. Like one was always the one I watched the most. I think what it was like I watched that one so much so that Back to the Future Part 2 for me was I'm getting the characters I love and it's not quite as, I don't want to say tired. It's not quite as like, it's a little newer. It's a little fresher for me. I think that's why I was like, oh, I can watch part 2 because I haven't seen that one as much. But let's face it, part 1 is definitely the best of the trilogy.
It is.
Down by far.
And you said it as well. The future stuff is so cool. Like when the first time goes, like the shark, the Jaws moment, and seeing the flying cars, the clothes, the self-drying clothes, lace-up sneakers.
I love all of that stuff. I love all of it. The cooking thing where they put the thing in the oven and it
right
comes out.
It was like not energize.
I forget what it is now.
What's the word? Damn it! I had it.
Dehydrate, like some of the hydration or something.
Hydrate on level something. Hydrate. Yeah.
So I don't know. Either way. All right. So now we have it on the show. We have it. We're basically both saying Kingdom of the Crystal Skull versus Back to the Future Part 3.
That's right.
I'm going to say that I think a lot of people in the chat are going to tell you right now there's no contest. That Back to the Future Part 3 has got to be a lot better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And I happen to agree with them.
Yeah, me too. Me too, but not as much as the chat would think.
Right. I agree. I think that, again, because we already defended Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I defended that movie for a bit, and I still defend that movie. Back to the Future 3 still feels a part of the trilogy, whereas Kingdom of the Crystal Skull definitely feels like the next generation of Indy, because Indy's a lot older at that point. I think it has to do with a little bit of the detachment of the franchise. There's a lot of similar stuff. You still got the same iconic scores, get the same, you get the silhouette. There's still moments of that, but at the same time, it's easier to see Indy as like an older man. So it seems a little bit more detached. Whereas Part 3, even though their cyclic gags are a little bit tired at that point, it still fits with the rest of the thing as like a cohesive whole. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's probably why you wanted to do the trilogies versus the trilogy. You wanted to keep out Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because the 3 movies are whole, and Back to the Future 3. I think they wanted to make a 4th one.
They did. There was talked about for a while. There's some talk about it. There was technically a sequel they did as a game, like an amusement park ride. It's actually in Brad's book. There's actually, if you can find, I have never seen it. There's actually footage you can find online. It's like there's actually a story, a Back to the Future storyline in that. It's almost a Back to the Future 4, basically, for what it's worth. I'd like to actually watch it at some point. But yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I think that's one of the main reasons I wanted to just do the trilogies, is because the better was for this particular category. And just out of curiosity, if you had to have picked just Indy 1, 2, or 3, which one would you put up against 3?
Temple of Doom. Yeah.
Me too. And I love Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom was actually my favorite Indiana Jones movie when I was a kid. The 3 that came up. Now it's my least favorite. And I think it has to do with like that. It's a goofy adventure. There's definitely a lot of cheesiness to it, but it's something that for whatever reason, it totally, just totally got to me as a kid. I love like the whole sequence with the, when Willie has to save them from the room with the spice coming down. And it's like one of my favorite Indiana Jones moments of all time. With that whole, he says, "We are going to die." That whole thing. I still love Temple Doom, and the whole bridge sequence is one of my favorites too. Oh, hang on, we're going for a ride. Oh my god!
And I love the opening of Temple of Doom. It's like so James Bond. Like,
yes, Club Obi-Wan.
Yeah, Club Obi-Wan. Yeah, geez, I totally forgot about that.
I'm interested that you say that. Now we both said that. If we had taken Crystal Skull out, I would have voted for Temple of Doom over Back to the Future 3.
Probably me too, but I feel like I don't know. It feels like you would be giving an unfair advantage, because if there was a 4th movie in Back to the Future, we would definitely include it. And if there was only 3 Indiana Jones movies and 4 Back to the Future movies, I would still put them all against each other. I feel like it needs to be fair like that.
Oh, no, I get it. I'm just. Would you have put Temple of Doom over?
Yeah, probably would have.
Okay. All right. You know what? Indiana Jones made that 4th movie, and it's in this case, it's its own downfall. I would definitely put Back to the Future 3 over Crystal Skull. I would have put Temple of Doom over 3. But either way, let's move on.
I didn't actually get to talk about my arguments why I pick Back to the Future 3, but I'll just quickly say something that I wanted to bring out. I enjoy Kingdom of the Crystal Skull quite a lot, and I actually like the alien sort of storyline in there. People probably hate it. I thought it was a very cool thing to go into. But I think why most people don't like it, it's because Spielberg tried to use modern day technology, like movie making technology, but throw it all back into the 80s style, this very campy style. So you have like new cinema doing old cinema, sort of, because and the technology and the vibe didn't sync up, which I actually enjoyed because I thought it was like a cool throwback by Steven Spielberg. Sort of, he says how much he loved the era, and sort of that's why everything felt so campy and, you know, out of place at times. But I think that's the franchise. You got to make it campy like that.
I get it.
And I actually like Kate Blanchett's Russian accent. It is a pretty good accent, I'll be honest. And she says some Russian words because in Estonia there's a lot of Russian speakers. I speak a little Russian, so I can tell that she worked hard on that, which is funny because most people hate her. That role.
Hate her. They actually hate her accent specifically. They say she goes in and out. I'm very interested to hear you say that. That's very interesting to me. I love Kate Blanchett, everything she's done, so it didn't bother me at all. I also love Ray Winstone as that Mac. I like Mac.
Yeah.
Great character.
He's a great character. Shia LaBeouf, though, that's where it all goes wrong for me. I love Shia. I love Shia
more now.
That wasn't it. That was like sort of the Transformers stuff that he did there, and I actually quite enjoyed the Transformers stuff, but that was like off the deep end.
I'm glad that Shia is back in action, though. But I'm glad that I'm glad the end of Crystal Skull did not make him be the successor. You know, it's Indy's son. Whatever. I wonder if he's going to be in Indy 5. I kind of wonder about that, but I guess we'll have to find that out later on.
Probably won't. But the reason why I pick Part 3 over Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is I do love the Doc story. That this movie was about Doc.
Yeah.
Marty was the character trying to save him, but Doc had the love story. He was the main focus of, because otherwise it felt like it was Marty's story. He was like completely focused on Doc. So I guess he's one of the greatest characters ever. So.
One of the great duos of all time. So
for sure. So yeah.
All right, let's move it on. We're kind of running a little low on time. Score and soundtrack. Score and soundtrack. Alan Silvestri, plus a little bit of Huey Lewis and a little bit of Marty McFly doing Sam versus the GOAT. We had the boat on. Now we're talking about the GOAT, not Hans Zimmer. We're talking about the GOAT, John Williams, the greatest of all time, John Williams.
John Williams. All right, I've heard the name.
Heard the name. I gotta
heard the name.
I will say that I love Alan Silvestri. I love him a lot. I love him quite a bit. I love his score in Back to the Future. I think it's a great score. I think there's some great moments, especially there's one of the more memorable, some of the most memorable moments in score history. That twinkle sound that comes in Ready Player One, comes in a lot of movies. You hear it all the time. And the action sequences are very well. There's a great pulse to them, a great rhythm to them. And there's great songs. Marty McFly singing Johnny Be Good is one of the greatest moments in the movie. Huey Lewis is back in time. And Power
Get to the butt already.
But it's fucking John Williams. Indiana Jones is the big... If Indiana Jones was somebody else's score, that would be their best score in the history of mankind. The reason Indiana Jones isn't John Williams' best score is because he has Star Wars, Superman, Jaws. Like there's so many other iconic scores in his timeline. This is just another iconic score he's throwing out there. And anybody else would die to have this kind of story. I'm going to say it. Alan Silvestri would love to have this Indiana Jones score. So I'm going to have to say Indiana Jones by far. And I love Alan Silvestri's score for Back to the Future. So that's me breaking my heart to say that. But it's John fucking Williams. I yield. Yield my time.
So I'll start off with talking
about break my heart
John Williams. Indiana Jones has a great score. Really does. I love the theme.
Gets the
sing
butt.
Along every time. But then there's Alan Silvestri with his Back to the Future score. Actually, I'll be okay. I'll drop the act. If I had to pick the better melody, the more catchy melody, I would give it to Indiana Jones for sure. I don't know what it's like, and also Indiana Jones probably has way more tracks on the score as well. Like the Back to the Future, it's the only main theme that you know. With Indiana Jones, it's like a whole big like track, full lots of tracks. Pretty much what I want to say. Yeah. I can't get around, and this is where I'll admit that I'm basing this on nostalgia quite a lot. the main theme score that comes on in Back to the Future, it's so much grander. The orchestral feeling, how it's played, like Indiana Jones do 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 do, but you can sense that there was like a whole orchestra that everyone played together, where the Back to the Future, like the main theme, is on, so that it feels grander and bigger. And for me, it invokes all the feels, and it brings me back to my childhood. And I'll admit, I'm basing this a little bit on my childhood memories. I do agree. I'll give you that much. I know I've been joking around that Hans Zimmer is the GOAT. John Williams is the GOAT, for sure. Like, Hans Zimmer is my number one, but John Williams is the GOAT. I feel like Alan Silvestri's greatest score is Back to the Future. John Williams' greatest score is Star Wars. I gotta give props to Back to the Future here.
All right. You're killing me here. You're killing me again.
I know.
Breaking my heart. Hot takes Jarvi. I'm gonna put your name as that from now on. Just hot takes Jarvi. I can't do no more. All right. Well, let's move on then before I start stumbling over my words because I'm so heartbroken. Potential sequels. Indiana Jones versus Marty McFly versus Back to the Future as far as future stories go.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that they both have potential for great stories.
Right.
But Indiana Jones is more of an anthology series, obviously. Is not Indiana Jones is the connection piece. He is the pivot piece. There's nothing else. It's all about his adventures. So you could do anything you want with that story. It's also about just finding a MacGuffin and finding a fun tale, plug it in, you get a sequel. Back to the Future would take a lot more. Obviously, especially, I mean, Harrison Ford could still be Indiana Jones, not for too much longer, but at least for one more film. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Michael J. Fox is not in the great shape to play Marty McFly anymore. He couldn't do it. So he'd have to do something where he'd have to be a cameo role, or he'd have to be like maybe he'd be the father and he'd be in a couple scenes and not do a whole lot. It's kind of fun though when you think about the potential. Though there's a lot of potential going anywhere in time. You get involved with the kids, like Doc Brown's kids, Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly's kids. You could do a lot with that, but it does feel like the way they're going. It's almost like it's cursed. It's cursed itself by doing the running gags for 1, 2, and 3. That's become part of the charm of Back to the Future. So you almost would have to include those to be considered connected to that in a way. And in a way, it's going to run itself into the ground by keeping to doing that. But you can't not do that. It's kind of like that, because if you don't do it, it doesn't feel right as far as the saga goes. So that's part of the charm. So I feel like it's got only potential to go downhill. It'd be great. Like Back to the Future 4 right now could get away with that and you'd feel fresh again, because it's like, yes, we're going back to those great gags and everything else. Whereas Indy, you have unlimited potential, I think, because you can do almost anywhere. The only unlimited you have is the fact that it's all going to take place in a certain time frame. So time, you have Back to the Future because you go anywhere, anytime. But Indy seems like you'd have unlimited type adventures that don't rely as much on getting overgrown with things. I'm going to lean towards Indy on this, but it's very, very slight on this. It's very, very slight.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You stumbled upon some of these same ideas that I was thinking of, and I think Back to the Future sort of has like the Star Trek thing about it, that it has like a reboot built into it already, or because you can have a new cast, you can have the offsprings of Marty McFly pretty much, but you can visit the older movies, sort of like they did in Endgame as well. You can put your characters, sort of put the new in with the old. You can do anything with time travel. There's a reboot built into it. But I think the fourth movie of Indiana Jones comes into play here. I feel like it deserves another one. It deserves a sequel. They try to, pass the torch to Shia. That didn't work. They're bringing back Harrison Ford now. There has to be. I'm not sure what they want to do with the fifth one, though. Do they want to rebuild the franchise or just send him off to the sunset with this last one?
I don't know. I haven't really heard much about it.
So I agree with you. I feel like Back to the Future has more options. It can do more, but I want to see. If I had to pick, I would rather see an Indiana Jones sequel. Okay. I would even go as far as, I know this has been talked to death about, like that Chris Pratt should take over. I feel like Chris Pratt is talked about a lot for a reason. I feel like there's no one really can be Harrison Ford, but if we had to pick someone, I feel like Chris Pratt has he has that something about him, that humor, that sort of charm.
Yeah, I get that.
So I feel like Indiana Jones deserves a sequel. Back to the Future doesn't really need one.
And that's actually, I will just touch base real quick. I agree that's something I was trying to say at one point, but couldn't quite wrap my tongue around it, so to speak. Back to the Future is a finished story almost. I feel like it was a finished enough story that they lived happily ever after. Whereas Indiana Jones never has that happy ever. I mean, they have a happily ever after every movie, but that means they reboot that every movie. So a new sequels doesn't feel like it's Toy Story 4ing it. Doesn't feel like it's like breaking a perfect ending and trying to make something else. It's just continuing adventures of Indiana Jones. Great, let's do it. It's not a sacred thing that you're breaking. Where Back to the Future 3 is more sacred of an ending. So I get that. So I do. All right. So we're both saying Indy for that then.
I'm going Indy.
Okay. I like that. I like that. That's good. That's perfectly fine for me. Although I wouldn't mind seeing a Back to the Future storyline continue somehow, maybe revisiting it somehow. I
wouldn't mind a bit. I wouldn't mind a bit. I don't know. There's that's the old man in me, sort of like, don't ruin that, don't touch it.
No, and again, when I say that I don't mind, I should give the caveat. It's not that I don't mind. I'd be interested in seeing what someone came up with to see if it worked in a way. But I agree, it would be a little tough, especially in that case. But let's just say how they did it. But all right, let's move on to the iconic items. We got the iconic items that are both, you put them up on the wall at Smithsonian. That's Indiana Jones. That's Back to the Future. The items we talked about, with Indiana Jones, you got the fedora, the hat, and you got the whip. You see the silhouette of Indiana Jones, you got it. You're going to have the hat. I mean, even that poster we showed you earlier. There's the hat right there. And it's the whip hanging on the side. It's always the same iconic look. Everything else. Back to the Future, you got the DeLorean. And you got probably the hoverboard. Even though hoverboard wasn't in the first film, it's always the most talked about.
Skateboard, hoverboard. Yeah.
Skateboard part from the first part where he uses the skateboard a lot, of course, in both the 80s and in the 50s when he makes the new skateboard or whatever by breaking off the thing or whatever. So the board basically is that. But the hoverboard is always definitely, I mean, it's an item that was so the difference is I'll get right into it. The interesting part about that is the hoverboard was so iconic, so big that they actually made a hoverboard because
I've heard about that.
Like that's just the thing. They're actually making an item. That's such a big deal that they made an item. Whereas the DeLorean,
they also made the self-lacing futuristic Nike sneakers. They cost like freaking $5,000 or something, but they made that.
That's inspiring. I mean, that shows you how much the film inspired people to do. They want that kind of stuff. Like, I love it. So that, to me, that's got to be a definition of iconic when you're making real life things because of it. But at the same time, the DeLorean is a car. It's a great car.
Did you know about the DeLorean before Back to the Future?
No, but I was a kid though. I was also 8, 9.
Okay.
I've heard
Did anyone though?
I don't know. That's a good question. But you could sell DeLoreans today. I mean, I guess you have to say the specific DeLorean with the cool features and the time circuits and the flux capacitor. That's definitely an iconic. Those are all iconic parts of the DeLorean. I get that, but to me, makes it a little bit too complex of an item to be iconic in a way, if that makes sense. Indiana Jones, you look at that, like I said before, you look at the silhouette, the hat and the whip together. In that order, you have the hat up here.
It's simple.
You don't even have to have Indiana Jones there. You could just have a hat and a whip here. You know exactly what you're talking about. I think, and they're so simple. They're exactly what you said. They're so simple that you can't not know what it is. You don't have to worry about it as much as far as like whether if you put a car up on the thing, if it's a DeLorean, you put a skateboard up there. It's not quite as saying that's Back to the Future. That's Indiana Jones is much more. The hat and whip are that much Indiana Jones and that much more iconic to me. So I'm gonna have to go with Indy. I think barely though, barely.
Yeah, I think you kind of downplayed the DeLorean.
Maybe,
but I do agree. It's simple. Like the hat and the whip, it's so simple, and yet it tells you everything about it. Like a car feels like a big thing, but what Back to the Future did for the DeLorean is something I don't know if we we've ever come so close to a car being part of a franchise. I think it might have been like Michael Knight with his, Trans Am. I feel like one of them, and the Shelby GT 500 in Gone in 60 Seconds. But the DeLorean by far is the most famous car in movies. I think that would be my thesis statement.
That's an interesting thesis statement to make. Possibly, it's
like
even used it in Ready Player One.
Sorry,
they even used it in Ready Player One.
Yeah,
too.
They did. Yeah, and as much as I want to give it to the DeLorean and Back to the Future, I can't. The fedora and the whip, everyone knows about it. Like if you put the DeLorean up, it's like, oh, that's the car from the movie. For maybe if I showed that to some of my female friends, they'd be like, yeah, I've seen that somewhere. Show the hat and the whip is like, okay, that's Indy.
Yeah, that's what it is. I love the DeLorean. I love that. That's what I think about. I mean, about being too complex to be so iconic. Because there's just too much.
Almost there.
You open it, you see the circuit, you see the flux capacitor. Maybe that should be the iconic item, see the flux capacitor. Except for it's not a real enough item to get your hands around in a way. It's like kind of like it's just like you just see that has lights growing up. It can't be that. I mean, it's iconic, but they're all iconic, but nothing approaching that simple. Bam, there it is, hat and whip.
I almost wanted. We talked about it before. I wanted to put the red vest in here, the jacket vest. I feel like that's also very iconic. But you were right that in the second and the third movie, it's not really in there. In the second one, there's like the futuristic jacket kind of has the same colors, but it's not quite there. But I feel like if you put on a red vest and go out, it's still iconic enough that
it is. I'm not saying it's not.
That's the first thing where my mind would go.
Right. I don't disagree with you on that. I think you could definitely use it that way, but at the same time, again, not compared to the hat and the whip. I think.
Yeah, I agree.
So
it's got to be Indy.
All right, guys. There you go. Everyone else in the chat, get your votes in now. Let us know what you think. Let us know how much of an idiots we are, and how right you are, how wrong we are, or vice versa. As I pull up our scores here, and it looks like it's a pretty clear-cut victory, and it is Indiana Jones, 7-3. 7-3.
Okay. I thought it was going to be more even. I thought it was going to be 8-2 or something.
I thought we had good things. We had they had some good items there, so it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise. It was a very close. All the categories you could argue both ways. You definitely could argue them both ways, and you wouldn't be wrong necessarily. So I'm happy to see that it wasn't a complete blowout. But it made sense. This is the first time in a long time I can say that it actually just makes sense to me. Yeah. This one makes complete sense of where it went. And I love Back to the Future, but the India is I think, just a twitch more iconic. Sorry, Brad. Sorry, Boat. If you're actually watching.
I'll give him that much that if I had 2 hours to kill now and I had 2 options, Raiders or Back to the Future, I would put on Back to the Future. That will be my initial pick, actually.
That's interesting. I might put on Last Crusade, but honestly, because I like that was
that's not in the option.
It's not in the option. I love both. I mean, I that's a good question. I don't know. I couldn't tell you right now what I'd put up, because I would like to watch both of them, to be honest, because I love them both so much. I'm actually gonna have to rewatch the trilogies again, both these the sagas again, because I do want to watch them again. But yeah, that's what we're gonna come down with. Indiana Jones wins this week. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for everybody who's checking out. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. Give us suggestions. We're always looking for more suggestions. In fact, we don't even know what we're doing next week yet.
I gotta say one thing. It's 8-4 actually, because Brad's category is in there as well.
Actually, we're gonna use Brad's category in there. That's true. Yeah. 8-4. Both going back and forth. So we'll go 8-4. That's what we'll say. The final is 8-4. So yeah, leave us comments. Leave us know what you want to see us debate next or fight next. We love doing these. We're always looking for more topics. We're not sure what we're doing next week yet, but it should be the same day, should be the same time. We're also going to work on our next live event, live show that we do. We do like once a month or so. So working on that as well. Jarvi, where can the folks find you?
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Richard Eric with a K Jarvi, and here weekly on Class Action with PLD.
That's me. It's me. It's PLD. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Denuzio, Facebook Paul Denuzio. You can find me on Call to Action for the Movie Trivia Schmodown After Show, where I do Chill to Action on Sunday nights now. Just had a great episode with Dan Merle and Mark Anabik. That was a lot of fun. Got another one coming up. I'm not going to announce yet. We're not quite sure yet. I've got a couple more in the works. And I also did open my PLD Projects YouTube channel. I've been talking about V, the sci-fi show of the 80s. And I'm going to be working on, as soon as like the Schmodown tournament slows down a little bit, I get a chance to breathe. I get some thumbnails from Jake Yakavetta, my boy. I'll get into the hair stunts and I break down all that stuff. And Richard Eric Jarvi and I were just talking about doing something else there. Maybe I don't know. We'll talk about something. Maybe we'll see. Maybe show.
It's
maybe
cooking.
Maybe we'll see what happens. We'll smell what we're cooking soon, hopefully. So, without further ado, thank you, Ben and Andrew, for letting us be on your channel. As always, the home of Action Industries, Ben Bateman, Andrew Guy. We are always Team Action here on Class Action and on Action Industries. Go watch their shows as well. They have shows every Friday, Action Unfiltered, Film Food on Saturdays, and Sunday they have the Action Guys. Great stuff, all of them about. So, but that's it for now, guys. We love you. We salute you. And of course, the court is adjourned.